Ever wonder what led to the tieflings being exiled from their home in Elturel? Or the history behind Zariel's rise to power? In this video, we'll be looking at Elturel, the capital of Elturgard, the kingdom of two suns, and how decades-long scheming set the pieces on the board not only for the fall of the city, but also provided the opportunity for the Absolute to make its move at the start of Baldur's Gate 3. So take a seat by the campfire, and let's begin our look into history at Zariel's campaign into Avernus. We start our tale with the angel Zariel leaving the plain of Mount Celestia, frustrated with the refusal of her peers to get involved in the blood war between demons and devils. At this time, the consensus between the other angels was to simply allow the demons and devils to fight each other in this blood war that they had been waging for untold years. Zariel, however, couldn't agree to stand by due to the collateral damage this blood war was ravaging across the entirety of the multiverse. Frustrated, she traveled down to the material plane to the city of Elturel, where she rallied an army of warriors and trained with the intention of this army following her into Avernus to fight in the blood war. The locals frequently had dealt with fiends that would spill out of Avernus and attack the countryside, so they were more than eager to join Zariel in this plan. In the year 1354 DR, Zariel's training of her new army was complete, and she led them into the gates of Avernus in an event that would be known as the Ride. The results were disastrous. While several of the soldiers fought bravely, many others could not withstand the horrors of the Nine Hells. Shattered, they turned and fled back through the gate, sealing it behind themselves, abandoning not only Zariel, but also the soldiers that remained by her side. This resulted in two very important events. First, this directly led to Zariel's defeat, along with the portion of the army that remained with her. Her defeat was the tipping point that turned her from being an angel and to embracing her role as the archdevil that she's known in present days. Secondly, the soldiers that deserted and returned to Elturel kept what they had done a secret. They reported to the city that the expedition into Avernus resulted in Zariel's death and the defeat of the army, but they claimed that the show of force was so significant it would deter future fiend incursions into their lands. These warriors were considered heroes by the people of Elturel and became known as Hellriders, a name that would stick with this cavalry unit well into modern times, and inspired many to join its ranks over the years. Elturel would face another crisis almost a century later in the year 1444 DR. The High Rider of Elturel, who served as the city's leader, was discovered to be a vampire lord. Not only that, he had been building a massive army of undead servants and mortal allies behind the scenes. Once discovered, the vampire lord's armies fell upon the city. The Hellriders were able to hold their own during the day, but once nightfall came, they took heavy losses. This cycle continued for several days. The citizens of Elturel were desperate for a savior, and Zariel heard this desperate plea. In a pillar of hellfire, Zariel appeared before a priest of Torm named Thavius Creed and offered him an infernal deal. She would save the city for now, but decades later, she would return to collect it as her own. Thavius accepted the deal without hesitation. Zariel herself wanted the city both to use its residents as soldiers in the Blood War, but also as revenge for the Hellriders abandoning her nearly a century prior. What transpired next would be nothing short of a miracle to the embattled citizens of Elturel. In the sky above the city, a radiant orb blazed like a second sun, burning away the vampire lord and his undead army. The citizens celebrated what could only be described as a miracle. Thavius Creed would go on to claim the credit of summoning the sphere himself through faith, and would rise to the position of High Overseer, making him the new ruler of Elturel. As for the blazing sphere, it would be named the Companion, and in the following years, pilgrims would travel to Elturel to bear witness to this holy miracle. In turn, Thaddeus Creed would lead Elturel to be more than just a holy city. He began to incorporate some of the neighboring cities and formed the holy nation of Elturgard with Elturel as the capital. However, devils always returned to collect their due, and Zariel was no exception. This brings us to the present year, 48 years later, in the year 1492 DR, the year of Elturel's fall and when Baldur's Gate 3 begins. Thaddeus Creed knew when Zariel would return for the city, and conspired to make sure the Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, Older Ravengard, would be present in the city for it. We learn in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate that Grand Duke Ravengard is in fact Will's father. Thaddeus Creed sent Duke Ravengard a request to meet for a diplomatic meeting to discuss peace and cooperation between Baldur's Gate and Elturgard. Up to this point, these two cities, their relations have been tense, going back historically. So, Duke Ravengard was actually not keen on going to Elturel for this meeting. However, it was the other three members of the Baldur's Gate Council of Four that convinced him to attend the diplomatic meeting. Thaddeus Creed would be in Elturel to greet Duke Ravengard when he arrived, but once he was sure the Duke and his retinue of Flaming Fists were well within the city, Thaddeus fled and actually headed towards Baldur's Gate. What followed was a disaster unlike any other. The glowing sphere, known as the Companion, that had long been a symbol of hope for the city of Elturel, turned black and crackled with energy. In an instant, the entire city of Elturel was pulled into Avernus, leaving only a crater behind. Only those residents not in the city at this time were spared this fate of being dragged into Avernus. So, how does all of this tie back into Baldur's Gate? The D&D module Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus covers the events that happened in Avernus and the intrigue that also happened behind the scenes in Baldur's Gate. We're not going to dig into that too much into this particular video, since there would be a lot of spoilers in that if there are people that still want to play Descent into Avernus. So we'll look at what some of the after effects were, especially once the city of Elturel returns to the material plane. At the start of Baldur's Gate 3, Elturel has been brought back to the material plane with the help of adventurers. This kicks off several events. First, Duke Ravengard's return to Baldur's Gate. He and a contingent of Flaming Fists begin their journey back to Baldur's Gate and stop off at the Inn of Joaquin's Rest, which we arrive at in the game right after a drow and goblin raid of the location. This is where we discover in the game that Duke Ravengard has been kidnapped, and if Will is with us at the time, this is also where we find out that Will is Duke Ravengard's son. This caused a lot of tension, as we know in the game, because with Duke Ravengard missing, this left a massive power vacuum in Baldur's Gate. Because what we also know at this time is two other members on the Council of Four have also died. So we are told about one that has passed. The other that has passed away is mentioned in a book that's found. This Duke mentioned in the book is Duke Vanthamper. And the quote from the book, you can find this book in the various locations in the lower city of Act 3. It's called The Duke of Baldur's Gate. And the passage that mentions Duke Vanthamper is as follows. After the death of Duke Vanthamper and the worrying disappearance of the Grand Duke Ravengard, during the fall of Elturel, the question of who would make up the Council of Four going forward was postponed, pending the return or confirmed loss of Ravengard. So while Vanthamper does not have a large role in Baldur's Gate 3, if you are interested in seeing kind of what her role was, that's definitely in the Descent of Avernus. Now, the second major event that we see in the game is centered on the Tiefling refugees. There is evidence that some, if not all, of the Tieflings that are part of this refugee group that we find in the Grove, were in Elturel when it was pulled into Avernus. For example, Damon, the tiefling blacksmith we meet in the Grove, tells us a bit about his time spent in the city of Elturel after it was pulled into Avernus. That's where he picked up some of his more advanced blacksmithing skills, such as working on infernal machines. When Elturel returned to the material plane, the surviving residents of the city blamed the tieflings for the misfortune the city went through and banished them from Elturel. This is why they began their march to Baldur's Gate. Their leader Zevlor, he is a former member of the present-day Hellriders and is leading the tieflings to Baldur's Gate. He actually gives you the Hellrider gauntlets after a quest. From what I've read up on the descent into Avernus, it seems like the city was down there for maybe 2 to 3 months. So it wasn't a long time. It was long enough, but it was not years of time where they spent down there. Now, for the third direct effect we see in the game. This is the refugee influx in Baldur's Gate that we see during Act 3 when we arrive. Most of these people that are outside the city of Baldur's Gate trying to get in, these were people that had not been in Elturel when it was dragged into Avernus. What happened is after Elturel was dragged into Avernus, a lot of these people lost their homes. And a lot of them were also scared. Elturel was the capital of Elturgard and considered the most protected city in Elturgard. This is where the Hellriders were. This is where the Companion was. This is where all the priests were. A lot of people fled in panic and went west to Baldur's Gate seeking refuge. They're trapped outside the city because without Duke Ravengard there to lead the Flaming Fists, you have these other captains that are now vying for power. And a big thing with these refugees that are coming in, some of them believe there's kind of talk that since Elturel may have had problems, that, Baldur's Gate might be next. There's a lot of panic going on. And that is kind of what has created this vacuum of not only power, but safety within the city. And that's where Gortash is able to step in and create his own power base within Baldur's Gate. That covers a very brief overview of the events that set the stage for Baldur's Gate 3 and the rise of the Cult of the Absolute. The information that I used in this overview came from the campaign module Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus and the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, if you care to take a peek at any one of those yourself to see what's going on in the region. I thank you all for listening to this video. This is my first time doing a deep dive lore of this size, so feel free to leave any thoughts down below in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like button and be sure to subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 and fantasy content in the future. I'll see you all in the next video.